A clause for Paws. A grumpy cat shifter meets sunshine crafter holiday romance. Hollybright Hollow Holidays. Book 2. By Win Valentine. Copyright 2025 by Win Valentine. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced in any form or by any electronic or mechanical means, including information storage and retrieval systems, without written permission from the author, except for the use of brief quotations in a book review. Chapter 1. Owen. The morning had started exactly as every Monday should, with perfect precision and undisturbed silence. I stood at the circulation desk, stamp in hand, working through the weekend returns with methodical satisfaction. Each book received its due date card with a crisp, clean impression, the ink never smudged, the alignment always precise. Stack, stamp, sort. Stack, stamp, sort. The rhythm soothed something deep in my chest that most people wouldn't understand, but that every cat shifter recognized. The comfort of ritual, of territory well maintained, of order preserved. My library, and yes, I thought of it as mine after 10 years of devoted service, existed exactly as it should. Every shelf alphabetized within its proper Dewey Decimal classification. Every periodical dated and arranged chronologically. The scent of lemon polish and old paper hung in the air like incense, and the winter sunlight filtered through the tall windows at precisely the angle I'd calculated when I'd positioned the reading chairs last spring. I'd just reached for the next book when the front doors burst open with enough force to make the return slot rattle. "Owen, perfect, you're here." I looked up to find the festival planning committee flooding into my entrance hall like a particularly enthusiastic invasion force. Ruby Thorne led the charge, her dark curls bouncing with each energetic step, followed by at least 6 other committee members who seemed to think libraries were social gathering spaces rather than sanctuaries of quiet contemplation. "The library is always open at 9 o'clock on weekdays," I said, setting down my stamp with deliberate care. "And there are noise policies clearly posted. We have the most amazing news." Ruby's enthusiasm couldn't be contained by something as trivial as library etiquette. She practically skipped to the circulation desk, waving a rolled scroll of parchment that I suspected would prove to be official town documentation. "We've selected the library as the centerpiece venue for this year's Winter Solstice Festival." My hand stilled on the return cart. "I'm sorry, you've what?" "The Enchanted Yarn Bombing Showcase." She unfurled the scroll as if presenting a royal decree. "Every year we pick a different building to transform with magical fiber arts. And this year, well, books and yarn just go together, don't they? The aesthetic is perfect." The word bombing made every feline instinct I possessed stand at immediate attention. My fingers curled against the desk edge, and I felt the uncomfortable prickle of fur that wanted to emerge along the back of my neck. I breathed slowly through my nose, forcing my shifted form to stay exactly where it belonged, carefully contained. "That's a lovely thought," I said, keeping my voice measured and professional despite the territorial anxiety clawing at my composure. "However, I'm afraid the library has strict policies regarding decorations and installations, the potential for disruption to our patrons." "Already approved by the town council." Ruby beamed at me as if delivering wonderful news rather than a catastrophic violation of protocol. She thrust the scroll into my hands, and I could see the official seal at the bottom. Mayor Hartwell's signature. The whole thing properly documented and legally binding. My carefully constructed Monday morning crumbled around me. "The installation begins today," Ruby continued, consulting a cheerful clipboard covered in sparkly stickers. "Birdie Ashford will arrive within the hour for initial planning and spatial assessment. She's incredibly talented. You're going to love what she creates." The other committee members murmured agreement, already discussing color schemes and magical integration techniques, as if my sanctuary weren't about to become their experimental canvas. Within the hour, I managed to keep my tone level, but just barely. That's rather short notice for a project of this magnitude. Festival's in 2 weeks, so we're on a tight timeline. Ruby patted my arm with terrifying cheerfulness. But don't worry, Birdie's a professional. She'll work around your systems. Mostly. Probably. She laughed as if this uncertainty were charming rather than deeply concerning. The committee swept out as chaotically as they'd entered, leaving me standing at my desk with an official council scroll and the sinking realization that someone was about to introduce chaos into my carefully controlled domain. I retreated to my office the moment the doors closed behind them. The small room behind the circulation desk had always been my refuge, my desk arranged with geometric precision, reference materials alphabetized on floating shelves, even my tea supplies organized by type and caffeine content. I sank into my chair and immediately began reorganizing the pens in their holder, sorting them by color saturation and tip size, despite having done this exact task yesterday. My hands shook slightly. Ridiculous. Completely unprofessional. But the thought of someone, even a talented someone, descending upon my library with yarn and magic, and transformative intentions made my skin feel too tight. The urge to shift pressed against my control, my cat form demanding to emerge and patrol the perimeters, to mark territory, to defend against intrusion. I forced myself to breathe slowly, focusing on the satisfying click of each pen settling into place. Blue-black, navy, royal, sky, periwinkle, order, control, everything exactly where it belonged. This was my sanctuary. I'd spent a decade cultivating this space, creating an environment where knowledge was preserved and accessible, where patrons could find exactly what they needed through proper organization and dedicated service. The thought of yarn bombing, such a violent term, made my chest tighten with possessive anxiety. And Birdie Ashford. I'd managed to successfully avoid extended interaction with Birdie for 2 years through careful scheduling and strategic retreat whenever she entered the library for her weekly craft magazine browsing. She was everything I instinctively knew would disrupt my equilibrium. Bright, chaotic, enthusiastically creative in ways that seemed to actively reject structure. The fact that I found her absolutely fascinating only made avoidance more necessary. I'd just achieved a perfect spectrum arrangement when the library doors opened again. I knew it was her before I looked up, some combination of hearing and scent, and that peculiar awareness that came with my shifter nature. Birdie Ashford arrived like a whirlwind given human form. She swept through the entrance in an explosion of color that made my carefully neutral library palette seem suddenly drab by comparison. Arms overflowing with skeins of yarn in every imaginable hue, emerald and amber and violet and crimson and at least 6 shades of blue I couldn't name. Several bags hung from her shoulders, bulging with supplies and trailing what appeared to be a scarf attempting escape. Wild auburn curls escaped from a hand-knitted hat covered in cheerful pom-poms, and her smile could have powered the town's Christmas lights. Owen, hi. Ruby said you'd be expecting me. Well, sort of expecting me. I know the timing's tight, but I promise I'll work around your systems. She spoke at rapid-fire speed, words tumbling over each other with infectious enthusiasm. I have this vision, enchanted garlands that change color based on readers' moods. Can you imagine? And book cozies to keep the volumes warm during winter, and the reading nooks could have adaptive comfort magic that adjusts to each person's preference. Yarn strands began sliding from her arms onto my pristine floor. I watched with growing horror as emerald green puddled near the circulation desk, followed by sunshine yellow and deep burgundy. She didn't seem to notice, already digging through one of her bags to pull out samples. Each one got draped over my circulation desk without so much as a "by your leave," a knitted bookmark dangling off the edge of my blotter, a small decorative garland sprawling across my stamping equipment, a peculiar scarf-like creation positioning itself directly atop the card catalog reference guide I'd placed at precisely the right angle for patron consultation. And I was thinking we could do something special with the children's section, maybe enchanted story blankets that project gentle images while kids read? She pulled out another sample, this one shimmering with embedded magic. Nothing distracting, just soft and cozy and, oh, here's the prototype for the main desk transformation. She spread a sketch across my workspace, completely covering the return cart tracking sheet I'd been updating. Something in my chest tightened past bearing. Miss Ashford. My voice came out more clipped than I'd intended, cold and sharp. I'm afraid we need to establish some ground rules before this project proceeds. Her hand stilled. The bright enthusiasm dimmed slightly. I pressed forward anyway, territorial anxiety overriding social grace. No decorations that interfere with the Dewey Decimal System. Nothing that blocks emergency exits or fire suppression equipment. All installations must be easily removable and cannot be permanently affixed to any surface. And absolutely no magic that could damage the books or archival materials. She blinked at me, her smile faltering. Of course, I would never... I mean, I'd be really careful with... These are non-negotiable requirements, I continued, unable to stop the words now that they'd started. The library's primary function is preservation and access to knowledge. Any decorative elements must be secondary to that purpose. Right. Yes. Absolutely. Birdie's voice had gone quieter, losing some of its musical quality. She pulled out another sketch, this one showing thoughtful integration with the existing architecture. Reading nooks enhanced rather than overwhelmed, decorations that complemented the wooden shelves. I did think about the existing space, see? Everything works with what you've already established, not against it. Her hands moved as she spoke, gesturing expressively to indicate different areas of the sketch. Too expressively. Her fingers caught the edge of my pen holder, the one I'd just perfectly organized, and sent it tumbling. Pens scattered across the desk in complete chaos. Blue-black mingling with periwinkle, mechanical mixing with felt tip. I bent immediately to retrieve them, my jaw tight with the effort of not saying something even more cutting than my ground rules speech. Sorted by color saturation and tip size. That's all it needed. Simple organization. Basic order. While I was cataloging the pens mentally, 3 blue-black, 2 navy, 1 royal blue with a slight chip in the cap that I should really replace, I felt something warm wrap around my wrist. I froze. One of Birdie's yarn samples had moved. By itself. The peculiar scarf-like creation had slithered across my desk with deliberate intention, and now wound around my wrist with what felt distinctly like affectionate curiosity. It was warm and impossibly soft, and if scarves could purr, I would swear this one was doing exactly that against my sleeve. Mr. Snuggles, no! Birdie's mortified voice came from above. I'm so sorry. He's very friendly. He doesn't understand personal boundaries. I looked up at her, then down at the scarf. Mr. Snuggles, apparently, currently nuzzling against my wrist with clear contentment. My cat instincts didn't know whether to be alarmed or charmed. Before I could formulate a response, 2 knitted mittens I hadn't noticed before arranged themselves on my desk with purposeful precision. They positioned themselves near my card catalog guide and appeared to be examining my organizational system with what I could only interpret as critical assessment. The committee has opinions about everything. Just ignore them, Birdie said, reaching across the desk to retrieve her wayward creations. I promise they're usually better behaved. Well, actually that's a lie. They're never better behaved. But I thought I had them secured in my bag. Mr. Snuggles tightened slightly around my wrist, clearly unwilling to be retrieved. The committee leaned closer to my filing system, and I had the unsettling impression they found my methods wanting. I stood very still, yarn creatures examining my territory, Birdie mortified and reaching toward me with her hands full of tangled samples, and my carefully controlled Monday morning lying in absolute shambles around me. Our collaboration had begun whether I was ready or not. Chapter 2. Birdie. The snow had started falling while I'd been inside the library, soft and steady like powdered sugar sifting over Hollybright Hollow's cobblestone streets. I hugged my yarn samples closer to my chest, most of them, anyway. Mr. Snuggles had wrapped himself around my neck like he was trying to comfort me, and the committee's mittens were tucked into my coat pockets where they occasionally poked out to judge passing shop windows. That went fine, I told them, my breath making little clouds in the cold air. Totally fine. Professional, even. Mr. Snuggles squeezed gently, which I interpreted as disagreement. Okay, so maybe knocking over his pens wasn't my finest moment. I dodged around a lamp post that someone had already wrapped in cheerful red ribbon for the upcoming solstice celebrations. But I apologized, and I offered to reorganize them. He said no, but that's just because he has a system, which I respect. Completely respect. My chest ached with something sharper than the winter cold. I'd watched Owen's expression get tighter and tighter throughout our meeting, his jaw clenching every time I'd pulled out a new sample, or talked over my own ideas, or moved too quickly and disturbed his perfectly arranged workspace. By the end, he'd been speaking in those clipped formal sentences that made me feel like a particularly unruly child being lectured about proper library conduct, which, honestly, was probably exactly how he saw me. He called me Miss Ashford, I muttered, turning down the lane toward the charmed stitch. Like I was a stranger. We've lived in the same town for 5 years. I've checked out books from him at least twice a month. Once I brought him tea when he was cataloging during that snowstorm, and the heating system broke. Had he even remembered the tea? Probably not. I'd probably disrupted his cataloging system with my chaotic tea-delivering energy. The charmed stitch came into view, its windows glowing warm against the gray afternoon. The cottage was covered in ivy that stayed green year-round thanks to a bit of garden magic from Ruby, and the front door was painted the same cheerful yellow as sunshine. My sign swung gently in the winter breeze, hand-carved letters spelling out the shop's name with little yarn skeins dancing around the edges. Home. Safety. The one place where my chaos was supposed to make sense. I fumbled with my keys, difficult when your arms were full of opinionated yarn, and finally pushed inside, immediately enveloped by warmth and the familiar scent of wool and lavender. The shop was closed for the day, my work table covered in half-finished projects that I'd abandoned when the festival committee had called with their exciting opportunity. Exciting. Right. I dropped my samples onto the table with less care than I should have, earning indignant squeaks from several skeins. Sorry, I need to think. Mr. Snuggles unwound from my neck and slithered over to my favorite armchair, arranging himself in what looked distinctly like a sulk. The committee's mittens crawled out of my pockets and positioned themselves near my sketches, ready to offer their characteristically harsh critique. I spread the drawings across the table, staring at the vision I'd so excitedly presented to Owen. Reading nooks wrapped in enchanted yarn that adjusted their warmth based on the reader's comfort. Shelves decorated with flowing patterns that highlighted different genres through color and texture. The circulation desk transformed into a cozy centerpiece that welcomed patrons while showcasing the magic of creation. Non-negotiable requirements, I whispered, mimicking Owen's precise pronunciation. Primary function is preservation and access to knowledge. He wasn't wrong. Of course he wasn't wrong. The library was his domain. his carefully constructed sanctuary of order and information, and I'd burst in like some kind of craft-themed hurricane, expecting him to just let me redecorate his entire world in rainbow colors and chaotic patterns. My family's voices echoed in my head. Mom's patient sighing when I'd turned all the kitchen towels into dancing dish rags. Dad's weary expression when my helpful enchantments made the workshop tools rearrange themselves. My sister's constant refrain of, "Birdie, do you have to make everything so complicated?" I pulled out fresh paper and began sketching again. Smaller decorations, muted colors, straight lines instead of flowing organic patterns. Everything removable, everything secondary, everything contained. The committee leaned in to watch, and I could feel their disapproval radiating through the wool. "I know," I told them quietly, "but this showcase matters. If I can prove that my magic can work within constraints, can be professional and controlled, maybe my family will finally see that I'm not just making things complicated. Maybe I'm making things better. Maybe someone like Owen Fletcher might actually want to work with me instead of tolerating me." My needles started clicking before I consciously picked them up, working through a revised pattern. Navy blue instead of sunshine yellow. Geometric shapes instead of wild spirals. Everything neat and ordered and completely unlike anything my magic actually wanted to create. The skeins on my shelves began to shift, rolling toward each other with agitated energy. I could feel them trying to form brighter combinations, emerald with gold, purple with orange, all the clashing but beautiful pairings that made my heart sing. "No," I said firmly, setting down my needles to physically rearrange them back into organized rows. "We're doing this properly, professionally, like someone who doesn't destroy organizational systems or knock over pen holders or—" My voice cracked. I pressed my hands flat against the table, taking a slow breath. Tomorrow. Tomorrow I would go back with a better plan, a calmer approach. A version of myself that wouldn't make Owen's jaw tighten with barely concealed frustration. I could do this. I could be the person this project needed me to be. Even if it meant my magic sulked the entire time. I'd chosen my most professional outfit, which admittedly still involved a hand-knit cardigan in 3 different shades of teal, a skirt with a geometric print that almost counted as understated, and my purple boots because some things were non-negotiable. But I'd contained my hair in an actual braid instead of letting it explode in its usual wild curls, and I'd organized my samples in a proper wicker basket with careful labels on each skein. See? Professional. Contained. Totally not chaotic. The library looked especially beautiful in the morning light, its stone facade dusted with last night's snow. Through the tall windows I could see the organized shelves, the polished wooden reading tables, the peaceful sanctuary that Owen had created. My stomach twisted with nerves and something else. That same flutter I'd been trying to ignore for 2 years. Ever since I'd first really noticed how his hands moved when he shelved books, gentle and precise and somehow loving. Stop it. He finds you annoying. Focus. I pushed open the door, slowly, quietly, like a person who respected peaceful library atmospheres, and found Owen at the circulation desk. He wore a charcoal cardigan over a crisp white shirt, his dark hair perfectly styled, and his wire-rimmed glasses caught the light as he looked up from whatever he was organizing. My traitorous heart did that stupid flip-flop thing it always did when I saw him. "Good morning," I said, proud that my voice came out relatively calm instead of my usual enthusiastic burst. "I've revised the designs based on your requirements. I think you'll find them much more suitable for the library's aesthetic and functional needs. Professional words. Adult words. Words that proved I'd listened and could be reasonable." Owen's green eyes studied me for a moment, something unreadable flickering across his expression. "Miss Ashford, please, come around to the workspace." There was that formal address again, creating distance between us like a carefully placed bookmark. I walked around the desk, careful not to bump anything, and set my basket down with deliberate gentleness. As you can see, I've organized everything by installation area, I explained, keeping my hands mostly still instead of gesturing wildly. The entrance decorations are in Section 1, the children's area in Section 2, and the main desk transformation. The yarn moved. I felt it happen through my fingertips before I saw it. That telltale tingle of magic activating without permission. 3 skeins rose from my basket like cobras charmed by music I couldn't hear, their strands unfurling in graceful spirals. No, 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 I whispered, reaching to grab them back. Too late. The emerald skein wrapped around Owen's left wrist with clear intention, followed immediately by gold twining around his right arm and purple winding up toward his shoulder in a pattern that would have been beautiful if it wasn't absolutely mortifying. And then, because apparently my humiliation wasn't complete, Mr. Snuggles launched himself from the basket like a heat-seeking missile, wrapping around Owen's neck with that distinctive magical purr that I could feel humming through my entire body. "I'm so sorry!" I dropped my careful composure and rushed forward, my hands already working at the knots. They're not supposed to. I had them secured, I don't know why." My face burned hot enough to melt snow. This was exactly why my family thought I couldn't control my magic. Why I was always ruining everything. Why someone as elegant and precise as Owen Fletcher would never. "Please, just hold still," I begged, trying to unwrap the gold strand from his arm. But my hands were shaking, making the knots worse instead of better. The purple yarn had created an intricate spiral that would have taken me hours to plan deliberately, and I couldn't figure out how to reverse it without pulling. My vision blurred with frustrated tears that I absolutely refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of him. "I promise I practice control," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I'd intended. "I work really hard at containing the magic, at making it behave properly. But sometimes it has opinions, and I can't." "Birdie." My hands stilled. He'd said my name. Just my name. Not Miss Ashford. And his voice wasn't clipped or cold, but something softer. I looked up and found him watching me, those green eyes steady behind his glasses. His hands came up slowly, carefully, helping to untangle the strands. His fingers were gentle with the yarn, mindful not to snag the fibers, working with the magic instead of against it. We worked in silence for a moment, our hands occasionally brushing as we freed the emerald strand, then the gold. The purple required both of us working together, his fingers holding the pattern steady while I carefully unwound it. When we finally freed Mr. Snuggles from his neck, Owen held the scarf for a moment. Then, and I almost didn't believe I was seeing it, he stroked the enchanted fabric with those long, precise fingers, his touch gentle as if Mr. Snuggles were a real creature who needed comfort. "He likes you," I whispered, taking Mr. Snuggles back. "They all do. I don't know why they keep doing this." Our eyes met as I cradled Mr. Snuggles against my chest. Something flickered in Owen's gaze. Not irritation, not barely concealed frustration, but what looked almost like curiosity. Maybe even the beginning of a smile, though it was gone too quickly for me to be sure. He cleared his throat, straightening his cardigan with careful precision. "Perhaps we should discuss installation logistics in a more controlled environment. The archives have a workroom that might be better suited for planning sessions involving enthusiastic materials." Was that a joke? Had Owen Fletcher just made a gentle joke about my chaotic yarn? "That would be wonderful," I managed, my heart doing complicated things in my chest. "Thank you." He nodded once, then gestured toward the back of the library. "Shall we?" I followed him, my yarn samples secured firmly in their basket, though I could feel them humming with pleased energy, like they knew something I didn't. I couldn't sleep. Above the charm stitch, in my cozy loft apartment, I lay in bed and listened to the soft clicking of needles working in the darkness. My knitting needles, moving on their own beside my nightstand, creating something I hadn't planned or instructed. This happened sometimes when my magic had particularly strong feelings. Usually, after family visits or failed spell attempts, the needles would click through the night, making whatever my subconscious needed to process. I rolled over to watch them work, moonlight streaming through the window to illuminate their progress. They were making a bookmark. Practical, contained, the kind of thing that belonged in a library. But the colors made my breath catch. Charcoal gray and forest green, shades I'd never worked with before. Shades that perfectly matched Owen's cardigan and eyes. The pattern combined geometric precision with organic flow, ordered lines that somehow curved into natural spirals, creating something that was both controlled and wild. Something that looked like compromise instead of surrender. Something that looked like hope. I reached out to touch the half-formed bookmark, feeling the magic humming through the stitches. Tomorrow we'd work in the archives, in that controlled environment Owen had mentioned. Tomorrow I'd try again to prove I could be professional and contained. But tonight, my magic was creating something honest, something that suggested maybe, just maybe, order and chaos didn't have to be enemies. Maybe they could be partners instead. The needles clicked on in the darkness, and I finally let myself drift towards sleep, the sound a gentle rhythm that almost felt like a promise. Chapter 3. Owen. I arrived at the library an hour before opening, my usual routine, sacred as any ritual. The pre-dawn quiet belonged to me alone, time to steep the perfect cup of Earl Grey and mentally prepare for whatever the day might bring. Except today, the day was apparently bringing Birdie Ashford. She was already inside. I stopped in the doorway, teacup halfway to my lips, and stared at the tornado of supplies currently occupying my circulation desk. Bins of yarn in every conceivable color. Baskets of what appeared to be enchanted garlands. A box labeled, "Reading Companions Do Not Open Unsupervised," in cheerful purple marker. And Birdie herself, humming something bright and melodic while organizing chaos into slightly different chaos, her wild auburn curls catching the early morning light filtering through the tall windows. Mr. Snuggles waved at me from across the room. The scarf was waving at me. "Oh!" Birdie looked up, her face brightening in a way that did complicated things to my carefully maintained composure. "Owen, I know I'm early, but I couldn't sleep, and I thought maybe if I got everything set up before you arrived, we could start right away, and I wouldn't waste any of your time." Mr. Snuggles launched himself across the library like a yarn-based missile. I had approximately 2 seconds to register what was happening before the enchanted scarf wrapped around my neck with enthusiastic affection, settling against my throat with a contented magical purr that vibrated through my entire chest. My teacup rattled in its saucer. The sensation was warm, soft. The purr resonated at a frequency that made my cat instincts sit up and pay attention in ways I absolutely could not afford to think about right now. "Mr. Snuggles?" Birdie rushed over, her hands fluttering anxiously. "I'm so sorry. I told him to behave. I promised he'd stay in the basket. But apparently he has very strong opinions about—" She reached for the scarf, but Mr. Snuggles tightened his hold with gentle insistence. "He thinks you need warmth and companionship," Birdie said miserably. "He's decided you're cold and lonely, and he's making it his personal mission to—" Oh God, this is exactly what I was trying to prevent. I took a careful breath, willing my heartbeat to slow. The scarf's purr intensified, as if sensing my stress and attempting to soothe it. "It's fine," I heard myself say. "I can work with a scarf accessory." Birdie's laugh escaped before she could stop it. bright and musical, like wind chimes in a summer breeze. She clapped her hand over her mouth, but her eyes sparkled with poorly suppressed delight. I took a deliberate sip of tea and pretended my face wasn't heating. Right then, I said, settling Mr. Snuggles more comfortably. Shall we review today's installation plan? I turned toward my circulation desk just in time to watch 5 jewel-toned mittens arrange themselves in a precise line along the counter's edge. They appeared to be examining my card catalog system, with judgment. Are they clicking? I asked faintly. Oh no. Birdie rushed past me. Committee, we discussed this. We don't criticize other people's organizational systems. We respect different approaches to... A green mitten pulled out the drawer containing my poetry cross-references. No, I said. The mitten ignored me, tiny knitted fingers pulling cards from their carefully alphabetized positions. Absolutely not. I strode forward, but a purple mitten blocked my path, making what I could only describe as a stern gesture. The green mitten was reorganizing my cards, by color. And I squinted. Was that emotional resonance? It was sorting Keats and Byron by the intensity of their romantic imagery rather than alphabetical order. That is not how libraries work, I informed the mitten. It made a dismissive wave and continued its assault on proper cataloging standards. I found myself in actual negotiation with Enchanted Knitwear. Look, I understand you have aesthetic opinions about organizational theory, but these cards have a system. A proper, functional system that patrons depend on for... The purple mitten grabbed a card and held it up, pointing at the color-coded tabs I'd added for genre classification. That's different, I argued. Those are supplementary organizational aids, not a replacement for... Committee! Birdie scooped up all 5 mittens in her arms, her face flushed pink. I am so sorry. You're all supposed to be helping, not reorganizing someone else's... She looked at me, then at the mittens. You have to respect Owen's system. It's beautiful and precise, and exactly right for what he needs. She said it with such fierce conviction that something warm unfurled in my chest. She turned back to the committee. And you should apologize to the cards for the confusion. The mittens made a series of gestures that might have been apologetic. Perhaps, I said carefully, we should start in the children's section, where chaos might be more expected. Birdie's smile was grateful and relieved. That's perfect. I'll put everyone back in their baskets and we can start fresh. For 20 blissful minutes, everything went smoothly. Birdie's enchanted garlands draped over the picture book shelves like living things, their colors shifting gently in response to touch. A child could reach for a book, and the nearest garland would brighten, offering encouragement. The effect was genuinely lovely, whimsical without being chaotic, magical in a way that enhanced rather than disrupted. I began to see the artistic vision. The way her magic didn't just decorate but actually engaged with the space, creating an environment that felt warmer, more welcoming. I was about to tell her so when she opened a box labeled Reading Companions. 30 enchanted bookmarks immediately escaped in an explosion of color and magic. They zoomed around the children's section like magical confetti, tiny spell-woven creations with minds of their own. Several dive-bombed into picture books, and suddenly the illustrations were moving, creating impromptu puppet shows. A set of fairy tale markers started acting out Little Red Riding Hood, using frightened picture books as props. My carefully organized early reader section became a tornado of displaced volumes and overenthusiastic craft magic. Books flew from shelves. Bookmarks rearranged themselves by color instead of call number. A cluster of dragon-themed markers started breathing actual sparkles onto my fiction section. I felt my control slipping, the horror of watching order dissolve into chaos making my skin itch with the need to flee or freeze or... Then I saw Birdie's face. She looked devastated. not frustrated with the magic or embarrassed by the chaos, but genuinely anguished. She dropped to her knees, reaching for a picture book that had tumbled to the floor, her hands shaking as she checked the spine for damage. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to the book itself. "I'm so sorry." She was apologizing to the story. I moved forward before I could think better of it. "What do you need me to do?" Birdie looked up, her brown eyes bright with unshed tears. "What?" "To fix this." I crouched beside her. "What do you need me to do to help?" We worked together for the next hour. Birdie used gentle coaxing magic, calling bookmarks back with patient words and careful gestures. I shelved each displaced book, checking pages, smoothing bent corners, restoring order one volume at a time. And I watched her. Couldn't help watching her. The way she handled each book with reverence. The whispered apologies. The careful inspection for any harm. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she murmured to a copy of Where the Wild Things Are, straightening a creased page. "I know that was scary. You're safe now." She talked to them like they had feelings, like they deserved respect and comfort. In Hollybright Hollow, they probably did. I shelved the final book, Goodnight Moon, returned to its proper place in the board book section, and felt exhaustion crash over me like a wave. My control slipped. I felt the shift before I could stop it, my cat form emerging in a ripple of magic I was too tired to contain. One moment I was crouched beside Birdie, the next I was looking up at her from a significantly lower vantage point, sleek black fur and 4 paws, and the mortifying awareness that I'd just transformed in front of her without warning. I expected alarm, discomfort, the polite distance people usually maintained when confronted with someone's shifter form. Instead, Birdie gasped with pure delight. "Oh," she breathed, dropping to her knees. "Oh, Owen." She looked at me, really looked, with wonder written across every feature. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The purr started before I could stop it, rumbling through my chest loud enough to echo through the entire library. Traitor body, traitor cat instincts. Mr. Snuggles, still wrapped around my neck even in this form, purred in harmony. Birdie reached out slowly, offering her hand for me to approach rather than grabbing. Patient, respectful. I butted my head against her palm and purred louder. Her laugh was soft and warm, and her fingers found the spot behind my ears that made me lean into her touch without dignity. "We make quite a team," she whispered. "You and me, and all our chaos." I looked up at her through green cat eyes and thought that maybe, just maybe, she might be right. Chapter 4. Birdie. The morning after the great bookmark escape, which was definitely going to be what I called it in my head forever, I woke up to 17 text messages and a notification that I'd been tagged in 6 social media posts. My stomach dropped. This was it. Everyone had heard about the chaos, and now the whole town would know I'd turned Owen's beloved library into a magical disaster zone. I opened the first message with the kind of dread usually reserved for opening bills or checking to see if you'd accidentally sent a text about someone to that exact someone. Ruby. OMG the bookmarks. Clara's daughter said they acted out 3 fairy tales. She wants to know if you do birthday parties. I blinked. Read it again. The next message was from Bram, which was unusual enough that I almost dropped my phone. Bram. Ruby says you made reading interactive. Good work. That was practically a novel coming from him. I scrolled through the rest. Half the town was apparently charmed by the idea of enchanted bookmarks bringing stories to life. Several parents wanted to commission sets. The owner of the toy shop asked if I could create similar magic for their holiday display. Nobody mentioned the chaos, the disorder, the way I'd nearly destroyed Owen's perfect system with my lack of control. They were delighted? I was still processing this when my phone rang. Ruby's name flashed across the screen, and I answered with a confused, "Hello?" "Stop panicking," she said immediately. "I can feel your anxiety from here." "I'm not." "You are absolutely spiraling. I know that tone. Listen, what happened yesterday was brilliant. I turned the children's section into a tornado. You made books exciting for kids who think reading is boring." Ruby's voice was warm and firm. "That's magic, Birdie. The good kind. The kind that matters." I sat down on my bed, surrounded by half-finished projects and yarn scraps. Mr. Snuggles, the original, not the animated version currently living around Owen's neck, draped across my lap like a judgmental cat. Owen must hate me. Pretty sure Owen was smiling when I saw him at the coffee shop this morning. Owen doesn't smile. Exactly. I could hear Ruby's grin through the phone. "Look, Bram wanted me to tell you something. He says when you're working with natural magic, his trees, your knitting, sometimes the chaos is the point. You're not failing to control it. You're channeling it." I pressed my hand against my chest, where anxiety had been sitting like a stone. I wanted it to be perfect for him, for the library. "And you think perfect means sterile, controlled?" "Birdie, you brought that space to life. That's your gift." We talked for a few more minutes before I had to leave for the library. I walked through the morning cold with Ruby's words circling through my mind, trying to believe them. The library looked different in daylight. The yarn installations I'd completed yesterday glowed with soft enchantment, creating pockets of warmth and color throughout the space. The reading nook I'd crafted now had cushions that adjusted themselves for maximum comfort. Tiny lights woven into the garland twinkled like stars. It was beautiful. Even I could admit that. Owen stood near the front desk, talking with Fenwick Ashworth, the former head librarian and possibly the most formal person I'd ever met. Both men were dressed impeccably, but where Owen's style felt precise, Fenwick's felt aggressively aristocratic. I tried to slip past them toward the children's section. "Miss Ashford." Fenwick's voice stopped me like a particularly stern bookmark. "I've been hearing about yesterday's incident." My heart sank. Here it came. The formal disapproval. The suggestion that perhaps my services weren't appropriate for such an important institution. "The bookmark situation," Fenwick continued, "was highly irregular." "I know." I clutched my supply bag. "I'm so sorry. I'll be more careful with the containment spells, and I can remove anything that—" "I heard," Owen interrupted quietly, "that 3 children who haven't shown interest in reading all year asked their parents to sign them up for library cards." I looked at him, startled. His green eyes met mine, and something in his expression had softened since yesterday. The tight control was still there, but underneath it I saw something that might have been appreciation. "The chaos," Owen said carefully, each word precisely chosen, "was unintentional, but the result was engagement, wonder, the kind of magical thinking that makes people fall in love with stories." Fenwick's eyebrow raised. "You're defending the chaos?" "I'm defending the creative vision." Owen's voice stayed level, but I heard steel underneath. "Miss Ashford's installations are bringing new energy to this space, energy that honors the books while making them accessible." My throat felt tight. Owen Fletcher, precise, particular, perfect Owen Fletcher, was publicly defending my chaotic magic. To his former mentor. Fenwick studied both of us for a long moment, then smiled slightly. "Well, perhaps there's hope for you yet, Owen. Rigidity serves preservation, but a library should also inspire." He left with a small nod in my direction, and I stood there trying to process what had just happened. "You didn't have to do that," I said quietly. Owen adjusted his glasses. A gesture I was learning meant he was uncomfortable with emotion. "I did, actually. You were right about your vision." I was resistant to seeing it. Owen dash dash. A massive wave of enchanted yarn rolled through the library entrance. The blanket had arrived. I'd created it last month during an experimental phase with adaptive comfort magic. The idea was a blanket that could sense what kind of warmth someone needed: physical, emotional, magical, and adjust accordingly. The reality was a semi-sentient textile with strong opinions about who needed care. It spotted Owen immediately and surged forward like a woolly tidal wave. "No," I said. "No, no, no. Blanket, please." Too late. The blanket engulfed Owen in yards of enchanted softness, wrapping around him with determined affection. It was trying to comfort him, sensing something in his energy that read as needing warmth. Owen made a startled sound that might have been protest or surprise, then went very still. "I'm so sorry." I rushed forward, trying to unwrap him. "It's supposed to provide comfort, but the recognition spells are overly enthusiastic. It's..." Owen's voice was muffled by yarn. "Actually quite warm." I paused. "What?" "And soft." The blanket purred, an actual purring sound, and settled more firmly around Owen's shoulders like the world's most devoted shawl. Owen looked at me over yards of enchanted knitting, and his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Apparently, I need care and warmth," he said dryly. I bit my lip against a laugh. "The blanket is very perceptive. The blanket is very presumptuous." But he didn't take it off. We worked together through the afternoon, falling into an unexpected rhythm. Owen would ask what I needed for an installation. I would explain my vision, usually with excessive hand gestures and color metaphors. He would suggest the most structurally sound location while I figured out the magical anchoring. The blanket stayed wrapped around him the entire time, occasionally shifting to provide different types of warmth. Mr. Snuggles had claimed his usual spot around Owen's neck, and together they made him look like he was being enthusiastically hugged by my entire craft shop. "The reference section needs something," Owen said, surveying the space with his cataloger's eye. "But it should be subtle. These books are serious." I studied the shelves, seeing possibilities in the clean lines and ordered spines. What if we did something that highlighted the knowledge? Like, constellation mapping question mark. Constellation mapping? Each book is a star. The yarn connects them to show relationships between topics. I pulled out silver thread that shimmered with tiny points of light. It would emphasize the interconnected nature of information while maintaining the dignity of the space. Owen looked at the thread, then at me, and something shifted in his expression. "That's perfect," he said softly. We worked as the afternoon faded toward evening, and I found myself relaxing into the collaboration. Owen's precision balanced my chaos. His careful planning gave structure to my creative impulses. And he listened. Really listened, treating my ideas with the same respect he gave his beloved books. I was halfway through anchoring a particularly tricky constellation knot when I glanced over and caught him smiling. Actually smiling. It transformed his whole face, softening the sharp lines into something warm and genuine and absolutely devastating. He was looking at the children's section, where the contained bookmarks were now performing "The Very Hungry Caterpillar" for a small audience of enchanted picture books. "They're teaching each other stories," he said, wonder threading through his voice. "Books sharing books," I agreed. Owen turned that smile toward me, and my heart did something complicated involving several dropped stitches and a complete tangle of emotional yarn. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for showing me this was possible." The blanket purred its approval and wrapped just a little bit tighter. Chapter 5. Owen. The library had taken on a different quality after dark. Softer somehow, despite the sharp edges of shelved spines and ordered categories. The winter moonlight filtering through the tall windows cast everything in silver and shadow. I should have sent Birdie home hours ago. The festival opening wasn't until tomorrow evening. We had time. Except, I didn't want her to leave. The blanket had finally loosened its grip enough for me to move freely, though it remained draped across my shoulders like a particularly opinionated cape. Mr. Snuggles had settled into permanent residence around my neck, occasionally tightening when he thought I needed reminding to breathe. Birdie was in the archives section, installing what she called memory threads between the oldest local history volumes. Each strand of yarn held tiny preserved moments, the scent of paper and time, the weight of accumulated knowledge, the quiet satisfaction of discovery. I'd stop pretending I wasn't watching her work. The Solstice collection needs something, I said, joining her in the narrow aisle between towering shelves. But I'm not certain what. She tilted her head, wild curls catching the dim light. What do people do with these books? Research, mostly. Festival history, magical traditions, family lineages. So they're looking backward to understand forward. She pulled out a skein of yarn that seemed to shimmer with past and future simultaneously. What if we created a timeline? Not just dates, but the feeling of continuity. Every solstice connected to every other one? Show me. We worked side by side in the cramped space, her shoulder occasionally brushing mine as she reached for supplies. Each contact sent my carefully controlled awareness into mild chaos. The blanket, which had been purring contentedly, suddenly went very still. That's odd, Birdie murmured. Then the blanket launched itself off my shoulders and wrapped around the archive door. No, Birdie said sharply. Blanket, we talked about this. Boundaries, remember? Respecting personal... The blanket sealed the door completely, yards of enchanted wool creating an impenetrable barrier. Birdie rushed over, trying to unwrap it. The blanket held firm. I am so sorry, she said, genuine distress threading through her voice. It thinks we need time together without distractions, which is absolutely not its decision to make. Can you remove it? Not without unmaking the entire enchantment, which would take hours. She pressed her forehead against the door. We're trapped until it decides we've had sufficient quality time. I should have been irritated. My cat instincts should have been screaming about confined spaces and lost control. Instead, I felt oddly calm. Well, I said, at least we have books. Birdie turned to look at me, surprise clear on her face. Then she laughed. Not her usual bright burst of sound, but something softer and more genuine. Owen Fletcher making jokes about being trapped in an archive. The world really is changing. We settled against the far wall, surrounded by centuries of preserved knowledge. The blanket, satisfied with its work, sent a gentle wave of warmth through the space. Tell me something, Birdie said after a moment. Why do you love libraries so much? And don't say organization or preservation. Those are symptoms, not causes. I adjusted my glasses, buying time. No one had ever asked me that before. Not directly. I grew up in foster care, I said finally. 5 different homes between ages 6 and 16. Some were adequate, others weren't. Birdie went very still beside me, listening with the same focused attention she gave her yarn. Libraries were constant, I continued. Every town had one. The Dewey Decimal System worked the same way everywhere. I could walk into any library and know exactly where to find what I needed. I paused. And the books stayed the same. The characters didn't change their minds about wanting you around. Oh, Owen. The last home was better. They were kind, if distant. But by then I'd learned that order was safety, that if I could just be perfect enough, organized enough, useful enough. I trailed off, recognizing the pattern I'd never quite articulated before. No one would leave. Birdie finished softly, or ask me to. We sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the quiet presence of books that held their own stories of loss and finding. My family didn't get it, Birdie said. The magic, I mean. They're craftspeople. Weavers, actually. But completely non-magical. When my enchantment started showing up in my knitting, they thought I was making things complicated on purpose. I turned to look at her properly. She was studying her hands, fingers tracing absent patterns in the air. They love me, she continued. I know they do. But they also think I'm a lot to handle. Too loud, too colorful, too much everything. She laughed, but it held an edge of old hurt. They visit twice a year and stay for exactly 3 days. Any longer, and I can see them getting overwhelmed by my meanness. Birdie dash dash. I've been toning myself down around you, she admitted. Trying to be quieter, more organized, less chaotic. Because I thought if I could just be more like what you needed, maybe. She stopped, color rising in her cheeks. My heart did something unprecedented behind my ribs. You've been toning yourself down? I asked carefully. I know. Ridiculous, right? You can't actually tone down chaos. It just finds new ways to leak out. Like with the yarn creatures having opinions and Mr. Snuggles refusing to let go and… Birdie. She looked at me, brown eyes wide and vulnerable in the silver light. I don't want you to tone yourself down, I said. I've been terrified of you, honestly, because you represent everything I can't control. Every careful system I've built to feel safe. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. Let me finish. I shifted to face her more fully, the blanket's warmth encouraging honesty I'd normally file away under thoughts to never express aloud. I've watched you for 2 years, cataloged every time you visited the library, every smile, every enthusiastic gesture, the way you talk to objects like they're friends, how you see beauty in things most people ignore. Owen dash dash. You're the most vibrant thing I've ever seen, like someone took every color I've been too afraid to wear and made them into a person. And yes, it terrifies me. Because wanting something I can't organize or control or predict, I swallowed. That's the opposite of everything I've built my life around. Birdie's breath caught. What are you saying? That maybe my careful systems were keeping me safe, but they were also keeping me from living. I reached for her hand, hesitant but determined. That watching you create chaos and beauty in equal measure is the most alive I've felt in years. That when the blanket decided I needed care and warmth, it was absolutely correct. Her fingers curled around mine, warm and sure. I don't want you to be more organized, I continued. I want to learn how to appreciate the beauty in your chaos, to understand that spontaneity isn't something to fear. I met her eyes. I want to know what happens when order and creativity work together instead of against each other. Owen Fletcher, she whispered, are you saying you like me? I'm saying I've been half in love with you since you first walked into this library carrying 17 different shades of purple yarn and explained they were all completely different colors. They were. I know. I lifted my free hand to her face, fingers gentle against the soft curve of her cheek. I'm also saying I'm terrified I'll disappoint you, that my need for structure will dim your light. And I'm terrified my chaos will drive you away, she said, that eventually you'll get tired of the mess and the noise and… I kissed her. It was nothing like I'd imagined in my carefully catalogued fantasies. Those had been neat, organized things, perfect first kisses in proper settings with appropriate romantic ambiance. This was better. Birdie made a soft sound of surprise, then melted into me with complete trust. Her free hand came up to curl in my hair, disrupting its careful styling. I didn't care. She tasted like cinnamon tea and possibility, like every spontaneous thing I'd been too afraid to want. When we finally broke apart, she was smiling, that brilliant, uncontained joy I'd spent 2 years trying not to openly stare at. "For the record," she said breathlessly, "your structure doesn't dim anything. It makes me feel safe enough to be completely chaotic. And your chaos doesn't drive me away." I pressed my forehead to hers. "It makes me remember there's beauty in things I can't control." The blanket purred its approval and sent a wave of warmth that felt remarkably like satisfaction. Mr. Snuggles tightened around my neck in what might have been a congratulatory squeeze. "We're never going to hear the end of this from the yarn creatures," Birdie said. "I'm certain they'll be insufferable." "Worth it, though?" I kissed her again, softer this time, taking my time to learn the shape of her smile against mine. Absolutely worth it. Chapter 6. Birdie. I woke wrapped in the blanket's warmth with my face pressed against Owen's shoulder and absolutely no memory of falling asleep. The archives were still dim, though pale morning light crept through the high window. Owen's breathing was slow and even, one arm around my waist, his other hand still loosely holding mine. His perfectly styled hair was thoroughly rumpled, my fault probably, and his glasses sat crooked on his nose. He looked completely peaceful. I should move. Any moment someone would come looking for us. And waking up tangled together in the library archives was exactly the kind of chaos that would confirm every reservations Owen had ever had about. The door opened. "Owen, I heard the most peculiar rumor about yarn creatures staging a revolt, and oh my." Fennec Ashworth stood in the doorway, silver-touched hair immaculate despite the early hour, wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the light as he took in the scene before him. Owen jerked awake, glasses sliding down his nose. "Fenwick, this isn't... we were... the blanket. Trapped us." I finished weakly, sitting up too quickly and immediately getting tangled in cheerful knitted folds. All night. Completely innocent. Well, mostly innocent. There was some kissing, but that happened before we fell asleep and... I see. Fenwick's expression remained perfectly neutral, which somehow made it worse. "The blanket decided you required overnight proximity." "It sealed the door," Owen said, pushing his glasses up with impressive dignity considering his hair was sticking up in 17 directions. "We couldn't leave." "How terribly inconvenient." Fenwick's lips twitched. "I shall endeavor to locate someone who can release you from this predicament." He left, closing the door with deliberate care. Owen and I looked at each other. "He's going to tell everyone," I said, immediately. Owen straightened his glasses again, with tremendous enjoyment. "Your hair is..." I gestured vaguely. He reached up, fingers encountering the chaos, and sighed. "Beyond repair, without significant intervention." "I like it this way." "Of course you do." But he was smiling, that small, private smile I'd seen last night in the silver light, and my heart did something complicated and warm. The blanket released us 10 minutes later, looking remarkably pleased with itself. By the time we emerged from the archives, half the town apparently knew. Ruby intercepted me outside the library, grinning like someone who'd just discovered a new recipe that involved both chocolate and chaos magic. "So," she said, "trapped overnight with the hot librarian. How very convenient for the blanket to malfunction exactly when you were working late together." "It didn't malfunction. It decided Owen needed care and warmth." "Did he?" I felt my face heat. "Ruby." "That's a yes." She linked her arm through mine, steering me toward the bakery. Bram heard from Fenwick, who very formally announced at the morning planning committee meeting that Owen and you had been unavoidably detained by enthusiastic knitwear. Apparently, Sage laughed for 5 minutes straight. Oh gods. "It gets better. Mr. Snuggles is apparently claiming credit for the entire thing." "He would." We reached the bakery, where the scent of fresh gingerbread and cinnamon rolls wrapped around me like edible comfort. Ruby deposited me at a corner table and returned with tea, and something that looked like it involved far too much frosting. "Eat," she commanded. "Then tell me everything." I picked at the pastry, some kind of cinnamon swirl situation that probably tasted amazing, but I was too nervous to properly appreciate. We kissed. And? And it was perfect. Completely spontaneous and messy, and he didn't care that I'd disrupted his hair, and I didn't care that we were trapped in dusty archives, and I took a breath. "Ruby, what if I ruin this? How would you ruin it? By being too much? By letting my chaos overwhelm his careful systems? By... Stop." Ruby leaned forward, expression serious. "Listen to me very carefully. You are not too much. You've never been too much. Anyone who thinks otherwise is wrong. But Owen spent 2 years watching you visit the library, 2 years noticing every detail. If he thought you were too much, he wouldn't have kissed you in the archives." I wanted to believe her. Gods. I wanted to believe that Owen meant what he'd said last night about not wanting me to tone myself down. "What if he changes his mind?" I asked quietly. Ruby's expression softened. "Then he's an idiot and will knit him something extremely itchy. But Birdie? I've seen how he looks at you. Like you're the most interesting thing he's ever cataloged." Despite everything, I smiled. That's such a librarian way to look at someone. Exactly. He's going to appreciate your chaos in his own methodical way. She pushed the pastry closer. "Now eat this before I do. And then go home and see what your knitting needles made while you were busy kissing in the archives." The knitting needles had outdone themselves. I stared at the bookmark lying on my work table, perfectly finished and somehow more beautiful than anything I'd consciously created. It was chaos and precision woven together. One side featured my typical wild creativity, swirling colors that shouldn't work but did. A cascade of jewel tones bleeding into each other with playful abandon. The other side showed careful, structured patterns in muted grays and navy, each stitch perfectly even. Where the two sides met, they didn't clash. They complemented each other, creating something neither could achieve alone. "Oh," I whispered. The committee, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet since I'd returned, shuffled closer on the shelf. "Finally figured it out," one of them seemed to say. "Took you long enough." "I didn't make this," I said. "You did." The needles clicked in response, settling back into their holder with satisfied precision. Mr. Snuggles, draped over a chair, radiated smug approval. I picked up the bookmark, running my fingers over the place where chaos met order, where my impulsive creativity and Owen's careful structure created perfect harmony. Maybe that's what we could be. Not him dampening my chaos or me disrupting his systems, but both of us making something beautiful together. The shop bell chimed. I looked up to find Owen standing in the doorway of the charmed stitch, looking thoroughly out of place among the riot of color and yarn. His hair was back to its perfect style, glasses straight, cardigan pressed. But his expression was uncertain. "I should have knocked," he said. But the door was open, and I thought, that is, if you're not busy. I wondered if... "Owen." I crossed to him, bookmark still in hand. "You're welcome here. Always." He relaxed slightly, gaze traveling over the shop with the careful attention he gave to everything. "Your space is remarkable." "It's a disaster." "It's organized chaos. There's a system here, even if it's not traditional." He gestured to the yarn shelves. "Color temperature, then weight, then fiber content. Unconventional, but effective." "You notice that?" "I notice everything about you." My heart did that complicated, warm thing again. "I brought something," Owen said, producing a small notebook from his satchel. "I made a list of questions about knitting. Basic techniques, terminology, how enchantment integrates with the craft. He paused. I thought perhaps you could teach me? I stared at him. You want to learn to knit? I want to understand what you do, to appreciate the artistry and magic involved. His ears were slightly pink. And perhaps create something small. Nothing ambitious, just a bookmark? I held out the one my needles had made. Owen took it carefully, fingers tracing the place where our styles met. His expression shifted, something soft and vulnerable crossing his features. This is extraordinary, he said quietly. The needles made it last night, while we were in the archives. They understood before we did. He looked up, green eyes bright behind his glasses. That we don't have to compromise or change, just create something new together. Is that what you want? I asked. To create something together? Yes. No hesitation, no careful consideration, just immediate certainty. Very much? Yes. I kissed him, there in the middle of my chaotic shop, surrounded by yarn and half-finished projects and sentient creations that had entirely too many opinions. When we broke apart, Owen was smiling. Right then, I said. Lesson 1, picking yarn that suits your personality. I assume beige is acceptable? Absolutely not. You're starting with this. I pulled down a skein in deep forest green that would match his eyes. Trust me. He took the yarn, fingers careful on the soft merino. I'm completely out of my depth. Good. That's where the best magic happens. 2 hours later, Owen had produced exactly 4 inches of slightly uneven scarf in forest green and looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. His stitches were careful and precise, each one methodical. But there was joy in the repetition, in the simple act of creating something with his hands. This is remarkably soothing, he said, adjusting his grip on the needles. Right? It's like meditation, but with more tangible results. I can see why you talk to your creations. There's something almost alive about the process. Mr. Snuggles, who'd been observing from Owen's shoulders, tightened approvingly. The committee had stopped critiquing Owen's technique after the first hour, and now watched with what might have been respect. Even the blanket, folded neatly on a chair, seemed content. They like you, I said. They've stopped insulting my organizational methods at least. That's basically yarn creature for we approve. Owen's lips quirked. High praise indeed. The shop bell chimed again. Ruby swept in, took one look at Owen carefully knitting in the middle of my workshop, and grinned. Well, she said, this is adorable. Ruby's here to give unsolicited relationship advice, I told Owen. It's her favorite hobby. My advice is simple, Ruby said, helping herself to tea from my kettle. Don't tone yourself down, Birdie. Not for anyone, not even hot librarians who look unfairly good holding knitting needles. Owen glanced up. I don't want her to tone herself down. Good. Because she's perfect exactly as chaotic as she is. Ruby settled onto a stool. And you're going to be good for each other. Order and chaos, precision and creativity. Just don't forget to actually talk to each other when things get complicated. Noted, Owen said seriously, as if filing away relationship advice in whatever organizational system governed his brain. After Ruby left, Owen finished his row and set the needles aside carefully. She's right, you know, he said, about not toning yourself down. I meant what I said last night. I know. I picked up the bookmark again, studying where our styles merged. I'm just learning to believe it. Then I'll remind you. He stood, crossing to where I sat among skeins of yarn. As often as necessary. He kissed my forehead, gentle and certain, and I leaned into the warmth of it. Around us, the yarn creatures settled into contentment. No chaos, no critiques. Just peaceful approval of how things had turned out. Maybe that was the real magic. Not controlling the chaos or enforcing perfect order, but finding someone who appreciated both exactly as they were. Chapter 7. Birdie. 3 days before the festival, my parents walked into the charmed stitch without warning. Surprise! Mum announced, spreading her arms wide. We thought we'd come early to see what all the fuss is about. I froze, half-finished scarf tumbling from my hands. Mum, Dad. My voice came out higher than intended. I didn't know you were coming. Well, you've been going on about this festival in every phone call, Dad said, setting down their sensible matching luggage. Thought we'd better see what's keeping our Birdie so busy. They looked exactly as they always did. Practical, well-organized, wearing matching beige jumpers that probably didn't shed or attract lint. Mum's hair was neatly pinned, Dad's glasses spotless. Everything about them radiated calm competence. Everything about me radiated chaos. Right. Yes. Of course. I scrambled to clear space, shoving yarn aside. Sorry about the mess. I've been working on the festival installations and… Still making messes, I see, Mum said fondly, stepping around a pile of purple mohair. Some things never change. It wasn't mean. That was the problem. It never was. Just gentle observations about how I complicated simple things. Let me show you the library, I said quickly. The decorations are mostly finished. Walking through town with my parents felt like seeing Hollybright Hollow through their eyes. All the beautiful chaos that made it magical suddenly seemed excessive and impractical. Goodness, Mum said as we passed Ruby's shop, which was covered in twinkling enchanted lights. Bit over the top, isn't it? It's for the festival, I explained. The whole town's decorating. Seems like a lot of effort for one day. Dad patted my shoulder. Your mother means it's lovely, dear, just very elaborate. The library looked stunning. Owen had allowed my yarn creatures to transform the entrance into a winter wonderland. Silver and white knitted snowflakes cascading from the eaves, the blanket draped artfully over the welcome desk, even the committee arranged into a festive garland above the door. Oh my, Mum said faintly. What do you think? I tried to sound confident rather than desperate for approval. It's very… you, Dad said. Certainly eye-catching. But is it practical? Mum touched one of the snowflakes, which immediately tried to nestle into her palm. She pulled back with a startled noise. And they move? They're enchanted. That's the whole point of the festival. Magical crafts bringing the town together. Right. Mum exchanged a glance with Dad that I'd seen 1,000 times. The one that said she's doing it again, making everything complicated. Owen emerged from the library, probably drawn by our voices. He stopped short when he saw my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, I said, voice tight. This is Owen Fletcher, the head librarian. Pleasure, Owen said, extending a hand with perfect formality. Our Birdie's been telling us about all your decorations, Dad said, shaking Owen's hand. Birdie's installations have been the highlight of festival preparations, Owen said. His tone was polite, but had an edge I'd never heard before. Her creativity has transformed the library into something extraordinary. Oh, we know how creative she is, Mum laughed. Remember when she enchanted all the tea towels to fold themselves, and they got into that terrible argument about proper technique? I was 12, I muttered. Always making simple things complicated. But she said it with affection, ruffling my curls like I was still that 12-year-old. That's our Birdie. Owen's expression had gone very still. If you'll excuse me, he said quietly, I have work to attend to. He disappeared back into the library, and I felt something crack in my chest. The rest of the afternoon was worse. Every comment was kind. Every observation was gentle. Every single word made me feel like I was too much and not enough all at once. These are charming, Mum said about the yarn creatures in my shop. Though, wouldn't plain decorations be simpler? I suppose, I said. And all these colors? Dad gestured at my inventory. Don't you worry about overwhelming people? The customers seem to like it. Of course they do, dear. You have a gift. Mum squeezed my hand. We just want you to be happy. Not exhaust yourself making everything so elaborate. After they left to check into their inn, promising to return tomorrow, I stood in the middle of my shop and looked at everything I'd created. Too much, too bright, too chaotic, making simple things complicated. I picked up a basket and started taking down decorations. The snowflakes came down first. They protested, trying to cling to their places, but I gently unwound their magic and tucked them away. The committee's garland followed, each segment indignant as I packed them into boxes. The blanket tried to stop me, draping itself across my shoulders, but I folded it carefully and set it aside. I'm sorry, I whispered. You're all beautiful. But maybe Mum's right. Maybe I should have kept things simpler. By the time I reached the library, sunset was painting the sky orange and purple. Too many colors, too dramatic. Exactly the sort of thing I would have celebrated this morning. Now it just felt excessive. I started dismantling the entrance display, fingers working automatically even as tears blurred my vision. What are you doing? Owen's voice made me jump. I turned to find him watching from the doorway, still in his cardigan and pressed trousers, but his expression was anything but composed. Making things simpler, I said, voice cracking. My parents are right. I got carried away, made everything too complicated and... Stop. Owen, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. He crossed to me in 3 strides. I understand that your parents said things that hurt you, that made you doubt yourself. They didn't mean... Intent doesn't negate impact. His hands were gentle as he took the snowflakes from my grip. May I tell you something? I nodded, wiping at my eyes. I spent the first 10 years of my life in foster homes, Owen said quietly. Different families, different rules. I learned to be perfectly behaved, to take up as little space as possible, to never make things complicated. I thought if I could just be good enough, organized enough, easy enough, someone would keep me. Owen dash dash. My last foster mother told the social worker I was a lovely child, very well behaved, but perhaps too quiet. Not quite what they were looking for. He met my eyes. I was 12. I decided being too much or too little didn't matter. I'd just be exactly what I was and stop apologizing. But that's different. You didn't make everything complicated, create chaos, refuse to dim your light to make others comfortable. Owen cupped my face gently. Birdie, you are not too much. You have never been too much. You are exactly enough, exactly as you are. The tears came properly then, hot and messy and completely unsimple. Owen pulled me against his chest, one hand stroking my hair while I sobbed into his perfectly pressed cardigan. Your parents love you, he said quietly. But they don't understand you. There's a difference. They think I'm exhausting myself making everything elaborate. Are you? I pulled back to look at him. No. I love it. Every chaotic, complicated bit of it. Then that's all that matters. Around us, the partially dismantled decorations waited. The snowflakes in Owen's hand were trembling, wanting to return to their places. I should talk to them, I said. You should. Owen set down the snowflakes carefully. But first, may I? He pulled out his phone, scrolling to my parents' contact information, which I'd given him for festival coordination purposes, and dialed before I could protest. Mrs. Ashford? Owen Fletcher calling. Yes, the librarian. I wonder if you and Mr. Ashford might come back to the library tomorrow morning. There's something I'd like to discuss regarding the festival installations. His tone was polite but absolutely firm, the voice of someone who'd spent years defending his library against critics and wasn't about to stop now. Excellent. 9 o'clock. Thank you. He hung up and looked at me. I'm going to explain to your parents exactly how extraordinary your work is. And if they don't listen, I will present a detailed analysis of how your installations have increased library circulation by 37%. Despite everything, I laughed. You have statistics? I always have statistics. You're defending me with data? I'm defending you with everything I have. He kissed my forehead. Now, shall we restore what you've taken down? We worked together in the gathering darkness, Owen handing me snowflakes while I reattached them to their places. The yarn creatures practically sang with relief, settling back into their displays. The committee reformed their garland, muttering about proper appreciation and some people's children. The blanket wrapped around both our shoulders, creating a warm cocoon while we worked. Thank you, I said quietly, for understanding. Thank you for showing me that chaos can be beautiful. Owen secured the last snowflake, then turned to face me. For teaching me that making things complicated sometimes means making them better. I kissed him there among the decorations, surrounded by magic and yarn and all my beautiful, excessive, perfectly imperfect creations. Tomorrow, Owen would present my parents with statistics and unwavering conviction. But tonight, we had this. Two people who'd spent too long apologizing for who they were, finally finding someone who wouldn't let them dim their light. Chapter 8. Owen. The next morning arrived with crystal-clear winter light streaming through the library windows. I'd arrived early, not unusual for me, but found Birdie already there, surrounded by yarn in shades of silver, white, and evergreen. Couldn't sleep, she admitted, looking up from where she sat cross-legged on the floor. Kept thinking about the library tree. As did I. I'd spent 3 hours sketching structural frameworks, calculating weight distribution, and designing a system that would support both stability and whimsy. I have preliminary designs. I made samples. She held up a cascade of knitted elements that shifted color as they moved, responding to the ambient temperature and light. They react to mood and movement. Watch. She brought the yarn close to me, and it warmed from silver to golden amber, threads catching the morning sun. That's extraordinary. Your turn. She grinned. Show me your diagrams. I spread my sketches across the circulation desk, precise architectural drawings of a framework that would spiral around the library's central pillar, creating branches that extended toward each section. Numbers annotated every joint, every measurement exact. Birdie leaned over them, her curls tickling my shoulder. Owen, this is beautiful. The geometry here. It's like a real tree but also completely structured. I thought if we built the framework in segments, you could knit connections between them. Let your magic flow naturally within the structure. Let chaos fill the order. She traced one of my careful lines. Yes. Exactly, yes. We worked through the morning, refining designs while her parents' appointment approached. The committee had draped themselves across my desk in what might have been moral support or possibly judgment. With mittens, it was difficult to tell. Mr. Snuggles had claimed his usual spot around my neck, purring contentedly. At precisely 9 o'clock, the Ashfords arrived. I'd prepared a presentation. Proper organization charts, circulation statistics, patron feedback surveys, and photographic evidence of community engagement. Everything documented with my characteristic precision. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, thank you for coming. Birdie stood beside me, shoulders straight despite her obvious nerves. I brushed my hand against hers, a small gesture of solidarity that made her fingers twine briefly with mine. Your daughter's installations have transformed this library. I began. Not merely aesthetically, though the visual impact is undeniable, the changes run deeper. I presented my first chart. Children's section circulation has increased 42%. The enchanted storytime scarf she created makes reluctant readers enthusiastic about books. Mrs. Ashford leaned forward, studying the numbers. Adult fiction circulation is up 37%, I continued. Birdie's mood-responsive bookmarks help patrons discover books that suit their emotional needs. The reference section, Mr. Ashford started. Up 29%, yes. The research companion blanket she knitted helps students focus while remaining comfortable during long study sessions. I met their eyes directly. Your daughter hasn't made things unnecessarily complicated. She's made them beautifully functional. There's a difference. Birdie made a small sound beside me. I reached for her hand properly this time, holding it openly. More importantly, I said, she's created something that brings genuine joy to this community. That's not excess. That's artistry. Mrs. Ashford looked at her daughter. Really looked, perhaps for the first time during this visit. Birdie, I had no idea the scope of what you'd built here. I tried to explain yesterday. You did. And I didn't listen properly. She crossed to Birdie, taking both her hands. Sweetheart, I'm sorry. I was so focused on worrying you were exhausting yourself that I didn't see you were thriving. I love it, Mum. All of it. Even when it's complicated. Especially when it's complicated, I corrected quietly. Mr. Ashford examined the installation nearest to him, a reading nook where ivy-patterned yarn created a natural bower around comfortable chairs. This is remarkable work. The integration of magic and craft. That's what I do, Birdie said simply. I make complicated, beautiful things. You do indeed. Her father smiled, genuine warmth breaking through his earlier concern. We've been seeing our worried little girl instead of the accomplished artist you've become. The Ashfords stayed another hour, asking real questions about Birdie's techniques and listening to her enthusiastic explanations. By the time they left, with promises to return for the festival opening, Birdie was glowing. Thank you, she said after they'd gone, for the statistics and the unwavering conviction and... I kissed her, cutting off the list. You would have found your way to that conversation eventually. I merely provided supporting documentation. You stood beside me. Always, I said, and meant it completely. We turned our attention to the library tree. I'd ordered materials the previous week, elegant brass framework pieces that could be assembled with precise joints. They arrived that afternoon, and I began construction at the library's heart, the central pillar that rose through all 3 floors. Birdie worked beside me, measuring yarn and creating test pieces. The base needs to be widest, I explained, fitting segments together. Standard tree structure, but with mathematical precision. And the branches should reach toward different sections. She held up a length of silver yarn. Romance section gets warm tones. Mystery gets deeper. More mysterious colors. Perfect. The framework took shape over the afternoon, brass curves spiraling upward, creating defined branches that extended like a skeletal tree. It was beautiful in its geometry, all clean lines and perfect angles. Now your turn, I said. Birdie sat at the tree's base, needles already working. Her magic flowed freely, yarn responding to her intentions. She didn't consult patterns or count stitches, just created, her hands moving with practiced confidence. The first element she completed was a trunk covering, knitted bark that shifted from silver to brown to evergreen, depending on viewing angle. It wrapped around my brass framework, softening hard edges while highlighting the structure beneath. It's perfect, I murmured. Order and chaos. She grinned, working together. The yarn creatures appeared as we worked, each offering their particular strengths. Mr. Snuggles wound himself around lower branches, creating garland connections between segments. For once, his enthusiastic affection served a practical purpose. The committee organized themselves into a quality control team, checking each branch extension for proper proportion and aesthetic balance. They made surprisingly good supervisors. The blanket wrapped around the tree's base, providing a cozy foundation and preventing any drafts from disrupting the installation. We worked late into the evening, the library closed around us. I assembled framework while Birdie filled it with magic, each of us playing to our strengths. Higher branch, northwest side, I called up from my ladder. How's the proportion? Mathematically sound and aesthetically pleasing. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. I climbed down to where she worked, finding her surrounded by yarn and winter shades. That's categorically untrue. I've said many nice things. Name 3. Your magical integration is extraordinary. Your color theory knowledge surpasses most professional designers. Your enthusiasm brings warmth to every space you enter. She looked up, brown eyes sparkling. You've been keeping track. I always keep track. Of nice things you say to me? Of everything about you. I brushed yarn fibers from her hair. It's become something of an occupational hazard. She kissed me there at the tree's base, surrounded by our collaborative creation, my precise structure filled with her chaotic magic, creating something neither of us could have built alone. We worked through the night, fueled by tea and determination. As dawn broke through the library windows, the library tree stood complete. 3 stories of brass and yarn, structure and magic, order and beautiful chaos spiraling together. The trunk glowed with Birdie's mood-responsive knitting. Branches extended toward every section, each decorated with elements that reflected the books they sheltered. Storytime scarves wound through the children's section. Mystery yarn created shadowy depths near detective novels. Romance decorations bloomed warm and bright. At the very top, where my framework met Birdie's final knitted crown, brass and yarn twisted together so seamlessly you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. It's perfect, Birdie whispered. I pulled her close, both of us exhausted and triumphant. It's us. Chapter 9. Birdie. The Winter Solstice Festival transformed Hollybright Hollow into something out of a snow globe, if snow globes included actual magic and slightly pushy enchanted decorations. I stood at the library entrance beside Owen, watching the first wave of festival attendees make their way up the snow-dusted path. My stomach performed complicated acrobatics that had nothing to do with the 3 cups of tea I'd consumed for breakfast. What if they hate it? I whispered. Owen's hand found mine, fingers threading together with the precise certainty I'd come to associate with everything he did. Statistically improbable. The structural integrity is sound, the magical integration is seamless, and your color theory is impeccable. You're using facts to make me feel better. Is it working? I squeezed his hand. Surprisingly, yes. The doors opened at precisely 10 o'clock. Owen had a schedule, naturally, and people flooded in. Mrs. Haverford entered first, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the snow. She stopped 3 steps inside and gasped. Oh my stars! The library tree rose before us, 3 stories of impossible beauty. Morning light streamed through the windows, catching on brass framework and making Birdie's enchanted yarn shimmer. The trunk shifted through winter colors, silver to ice blue to deep evergreen, responding to the wonder radiating from everyone who entered. It's breathing, Mrs. Haverford said. The whole thing is breathing with magic. She wasn't wrong. The tree pulsed gently, alive with intention and warmth. Mr. Snuggles had woven himself through the lower branches like living garland, purring contentedly. The committee perched throughout the structure, straightening decorations that didn't need straightening but looking very official doing it. The blanket draped around the base like a cozy tree skirt, occasionally reaching out to wrap around cold visitors. More people arrived, families with children, elderly residents, young couples, solitary readers, and each person stopped in wonder. "Look at the children's section," someone exclaimed. I'd knitted story scarves that hung from branches over the picture books, each one animated with scenes from beloved tales. A child reached up to touch one and giggled as characters danced across the yarn, acting out their adventures. "The mysteries section is perfect," another voice said. Those decorations created subtle shadows and depths, yarn that seemed to hold secrets. Readers browsed the shelves with renewed interest, drawn by the atmospheric magic. Ruby found me in the growing crowd, her red hair practically vibrating with excitement. "Birdie, this is incredible. Owen built the framework." "And you filled it with magic," Owen interrupted smoothly. "Equal contributions." Ruby grinned at him. "You two are disgustingly adorable together." "Thank you," Owen said without a trace of irony, which made Ruby laugh and me feel warm despite the winter chill every time someone opened the door. Bram appeared next, coffee in hand, and his usually grumpy expression softened into something approaching approval. "Not bad, Ashford, Fletcher. The structural elements complement the chaos nicely." "That might be the kindest thing you've ever said to me," I told him. "Don't get used to it." But he was smiling, and beside him, Ruby was absolutely glowing with happiness, and I realized this warmth and friendship and found family, was exactly what the festival was meant to celebrate. The morning progressed in a blur of delighted faces and genuine wonder. A teenager who usually skulked in the back corner stopped beneath branches decorated with dark, moody yarn. The decorations shifted to match her energy, deep purples and midnight blues swirling with subtle silver threads. She stared up at them, then reached for a book she'd never have chosen otherwise. "It knew," she whispered to her friend. "The tree knew what I needed." An elderly man with tired eyes settled into a chair beneath romance section branches. The yarn above him bloomed with warm pinks and golds, and the blanket detached part of itself to drape over his shoulders. He opened a book and smiled, looking lighter than when he'd entered. A young mother with twins found the children's section, where Mr. Snuggles had created a perfect nest of soft, safe garland. The twins settled immediately, enchanted by the story scarves, giving their mother the first peaceful moment she'd probably had all morning. "It's working," I breathed. Owen stood beside me, watching everything with his careful, cataloging gaze. "Your magic understands what people need. It always has." "Our magic," I corrected. "My chaos wouldn't work without your structure to hold it." "Complementary strengths." "Exactly." Fenwick Thornberry arrived mid-morning, his usual critical expression firmly in place. I braced myself for complaints about proper decoration protocol or historical accuracy concerns. He stopped in the entrance, staring at the library tree. Then his eyes got suspiciously shiny. "Miss Ashford," he said quietly. "Mr. Fletcher, this is—" He cleared his throat. "This is precisely what this library needed." I might have teared up a little. Owen's hand tightened on mine. The integration of traditional structural elements with innovative magical application demonstrates exceptional understanding of both historical preservation and contemporary craft evolution. Fenwick continued, back to his formal speech patterns. "Well done." "Did Fenwick Thornberry just give us a compliment?" I whispered after he'd moved toward the historical section, where brass and yarn created elegant, timeless beauty. "Document this moment," Owen said. "It may never happen again." The afternoon brought even more visitors. The library filled with laughter and quiet conversation, with children's delighted squeals and elderly residents' contented sighs. The tree responded to everyone, its mood-responsive elements shifting to provide exactly what each person needed: excitement for some, calm for others, warmth for everyone. I found myself standing back, watching it all with a sensation I couldn't quite name. This wasn't about toning myself down or fitting into someone else's expectations. This was about finding the perfect partner, someone whose strengths complemented mine, whose order gave my chaos room to breathe and flourish, whose careful structure let my magic shine instead of trying to contain it. Owen appeared beside me with 2 cups of tea, somehow maintaining perfect timing despite the crowd. "You look contemplative," he observed. "I'm thinking about my family," I admitted. About how they always made me feel like I needed to be less, quieter, more controlled. And now? Now I realize they weren't the right audience. I gestured at the filled library, at people finding exactly what they needed among our collaborative creation. I wasn't too much. I just needed someone who saw my chaos as a feature instead of a bug. "Your enthusiasm and creativity are your greatest strengths," says the man who schedules his tea breaks. "Complementary strengths," he repeated, and kissed my temple with casual affection that would have seemed impossible 3 weeks ago. Ruby found us again as the afternoon light began to fade, the winter solstice's shortest day approaching its early evening. "The festival committee wants to feature the library tree in next year's official materials," she announced, "and possibly commission you both for permanent installations." "Permanent," I squeaked. Owen's expression remained calm, but I felt his hand tighten on mine. "We would need to discuss terms." "We?" Ruby's grin was absolutely wicked. "As in, you two? Together?" "Obviously," Owen said with such matter-of-fact certainty that my heart did complicated somersaults. After Ruby left, still grinning, Owen turned to me. "I should clarify," he said. "I meant we in the collaborative professional sense, but also in the we're together and I'd like to keep being together sense," I offered hopefully. "Precisely." "Good. Because I've become rather attached to your scheduling and your cat form and your secret romantic streak. And I've become rather attached to your chaos and your magic and your ability to find beauty in imperfection." We stood together as the library slowly emptied, visitors heading to other festival events but carrying warmth with them. The library tree glowed in the fading light, brass and yarn creating shadows and shimmer. Mr. Snuggles dozed in his garland nest. The committee had arranged themselves into a decorative pattern. The blanket wrapped around both of us, offering comfort we didn't need but appreciated anyway. "I feel peaceful," I said quietly. "Regardless of what happens next, regardless of whether this installation succeeds beyond today, I feel like I've found something I didn't know I was searching for." "Partnership," Owen said. "Perfect partnership." He kissed me there in our library, surrounded by our creation, and I knew, deep in my chaotic, creative, enthusiastic heart, that I'd finally found someone who didn't just tolerate my too-muchness, but cherished it completely. Chapter 10. Owen. The judging panel gathered near the reference section, their voices low and serious as they examined the library tree from every angle. I recognized the official festival committee members. Ruby served as magical crafts representative, naturally, along with Fenwick representing historical preservation, Bram for architectural integration, and 3 visiting experts from neighboring magical communities. I should have felt calm. The installation spoke for itself. The crowd's response had been overwhelmingly positive. We'd achieved something remarkable. Instead, my chest felt tight. Birdie stood beside me, her hand warm in mine. She'd gone quiet, which meant she was spiraling internally despite her cheerful expression. I could see it in the way her free hand kept reaching for yarn that wasn't there. The nervous energy that usually expressed itself through bouncing now compressed into stillness. "They're taking a long time," she whispered. "Thorough deliberation indicates serious consideration. Or serious disagreement." Before I could respond, Fenwick separated from the group and approached us. His expression gave nothing away. Typical Fenwick, maintaining professional neutrality even in moments of significance. "The panel requests a brief statement from both collaborators," he announced. "Nothing formal, simply your perspective on the project's intent and execution." My mouth went dry. Public speaking, about emotions and creative process, and Birdie squeezed my hand. "I can handle it," she offered quickly. "I'm good at talking. You know that. Sometimes too good. I could probably fill the entire time with just explaining the committee's personality development." "No," she blinked. "No? I should speak." The words emerged before I'd fully processed them. I need to speak. Because this wasn't just about the installation. This was about Birdie. Brilliant, chaotic, generous Birdie, who'd spent her entire life being told she was too much, who'd learned to apologize for her enthusiasm, who still believed deep down that people merely tolerated her energy rather than cherished it. And I'd contributed to that belief. Those first meetings, my rigid insistence on rules and order, my condescending dismissal of her creative approach, I'd made her feel like she needed to change to work with me. She deserved better. She deserved someone willing to be publicly vulnerable about what she'd taught him. We followed Fenwick to the center of the main reading room. The crowd had thinned but still numbered at least 50 people. The judging panel waited expectantly. My cat instinct screamed at the attention focused on us. I cleared my throat. "I've been Hollybright Hollow's librarian for 10 years, I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "In that time, I've prided myself on maintaining order, precision, and proper systems. I believed those qualities made this library a sanctuary." Birdie's hand trembled slightly in mine. I was wrong. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Fenwick's eyebrows rose fractionally. "I wasn't wrong about the importance of order," I clarified, "but I was wrong about believing order was the only path to sanctuary. I was wrong about viewing spontaneity as incompatible with beauty. I was wrong about treating creativity as something that needed to be controlled rather than celebrated." I looked at Birdie. Her brown eyes were wide, shimmering. 3 weeks ago, Birdie Ashford arrived in my library with armfuls of magical yarn and enough enthusiasm to power the entire town. My first reaction was horror. A few people laughed. Birdie made a small, choked sound. My second reaction was to establish rules and constraints designed to minimize disruption to my careful systems. "To be fair," Birdie interjected softly, "I did immediately create chaos." "You created magic." I turned to address the crowd properly, though my hand stayed locked with hers. Every moment I spent fighting her creative process, I was fighting the very thing this library needed. Not because order isn't valuable, it is, but because order without warmth becomes sterile. Precision without joy becomes empty. Control without trust becomes isolation. My voice gained strength as I continued. Birdie taught me that chaos can be beautiful, that spontaneity can serve purpose, that the best sanctuary isn't one that excludes everything unpredictable, but one that makes room for both structure and surprise. I could feel every eye on me, reserved, private Owen Fletcher, delivering a speech about feelings in front of the entire town. My younger self would have been mortified. My current self just needed Birdie to understand. She approached this project with genuine respect for what the library meant to people. She listened when I explained why certain sections needed careful handling. She created systems within her apparent chaos: color coordination, mood responsiveness, collaborative integration with existing architecture. But more than that, she saw possibilities I'd been too rigid to imagine. The library tree shimmered behind us, brass and yarn creating patterns of light and shadow. The installation you see represents something far more significant than innovative craft techniques or magical application. It represents what happens when two people with completely different approaches choose collaboration over competition. When order and chaos discover they're not opposites, but complements. Birdie's thumb stroked across my knuckles. I glanced at her, tears streaming down her face now, but smiling. Birdie once told me she worried about being too much, too loud, too chaotic, too enthusiastic. She spent years trying to tone herself down, to fit into spaces that demanded she be less. My voice roughened with emotion I no longer tried to hide. But she's not too much. She's exactly right. Her chaos is purposeful. Her enthusiasm is infectious. Her magic responds to emotional needs because she genuinely cares about bringing joy and warmth to everyone around her. The problem was never Birdie being too much. The problem was people, including me, being too limited to appreciate her gifts. The crowd had gone completely silent. Working with her these past 3 weeks has fundamentally changed how I understand my role here. This library isn't just a repository for books and information. It's a living space that should reflect the community it serves, structured enough to provide reliability, flexible enough to offer surprise, beautiful enough to inspire wonder. I looked directly at the judging panel. So, when you evaluate this installation, I hope you see more than innovative yarn bombing or successful magical integration. I hope you see what's possible when we make room for different kinds of beauty, when we trust that chaos and order can dance together instead of fighting for dominance. Then I turned fully to Birdie, no longer caring about the audience or the judges or the outcome. And I hope everyone here understands that I'm completely, irrevocably in love with the woman who taught me these lessons, with her wild curls and her color-clashing outfits, and her tendency to talk to yarn creatures, with her generous heart and her creative magic, and her ability to find beauty in imperfection. Birdie made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "You're giving a love confession in front of the entire town," she managed. "Yes? You, Owen Fletcher, who gets uncomfortable when people talk during quiet hours. I'm making an exception." She laughed properly then, bright and joyful, and kissed me in front of everyone, judges and townspeople and Fenwick Thornberry himself. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. When we finally broke apart, Ruby was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Bram looked quietly pleased. Even Fenwick's expression had softened into something approaching warmth. The head judge, a distinguished witch from the neighboring town of Moonhaven, cleared her throat. "Well," she said dryly, "that certainly provides context for our evaluation." The panel huddled briefly. I felt Birdie trembling against my side, though whether from emotion or anxiety I couldn't tell. Probably both. The head judge stepped forward. "The Winter Solstice Festival Committee is pleased to announce that the library tree has been selected as this year's showcase winner. Furthermore, it has been unanimously designated as the most innovative and functionally successful installation in the festival's 63-year history." The applause this time was deafening. Birdie burst into tears again. Happy ones, I was learning to recognize the difference. I held her while she shook with joy and relief and lingering disbelief. "We won," she whispered against my chest. "We did." "You gave a speech about feelings." "I did." "You told everyone you love me." "I did." "Because I do." She pulled back enough to look at me properly, her face blotchy and beautiful. "I love you too. Obviously. I've loved you for ages, but didn't think someone like you could ever." I kissed her quiet, tasting salt and sweetness.
Thank you for listening. Please visit me at winvalentine.com to stay up to date. Please subscribe, leave a comment, and review.